The stories that you tell yourself are the ones that, for you as a leader, can either free you or keep you totally stuck. And here's the kicker. Most of these stories aren't even true anymore. And I know that you know that. So I had a client who kind of kept saying, I'm just not good with people. I'm just not good with people. And he was leading a team of about 30. And that was a story that was old, but it was totally running the show. So I'm going to tell you what happened next. So if you are new here, welcome to the Joyosity podcast. I'm so glad that you found your way to this corner of leadership and life where joy is in the center. I'm Jenn Whitmer, international keynote speaker, leadership consultant, and all-around joy bringer. And if you are jumping back in, welcome. Welcome back to season 3. This fall, we are continuing our series inspired by my new book that's coming this fall called Joyosity: How to Cultivate Intense Happiness in Work and Life, even when things are what they are. And here in Joyosity land, we are not settling for toxicity, overwhelmed leaders, or the exhaustion of it's all just too much. So each episode, I'm bringing you stories, research, and tools that you can use right away to create a thriving, flourishing workplace. And we're starting with you. So one of my clients, I'm not good with people story. So that narrative started really early on in his career when he just bombed a presentation. And I mean, like in that moment, he just froze and he stumbled. And a senior leader told him, maybe you should just stick to the spreadsheets. That one offhanded comment became the soundtrack of his leadership. And for years, every time he would enter a meeting where he had to run the meeting, or if he, especially if he were doing a presentation, this story was running on repeat in the back of his head. You're not good with people. I should just stick to spreadsheets. Until we were talking about it. And we worked through a process that I talk about in the book and that helped him rewrite this story based on some reality. Because what was happening at this point, by the time we were working together as my executive leadership client, he was running a team of 30 people. And he'd been running a team for about 7 or 8 years. He started to rewrite that story with, I am connected with people and I'm continually learning to lead better. I'm connected with people and I'm continually learning to lead better. Not just the feeling of confidence, the skill of confidence, and his results and the way he carried himself, that executive presence we hear all the time, all of that transformed. And those types of stories, those old stories, will stick around with you for decades, well past their expiration date. Very early on in his career, spreadsheets were probably his stronger skill. I still don't think that leader should have said, maybe you should stick to spreadsheets, but that was probably true. But because it went unexamined, if you've ever listen to the musical Wicked, and they talk about the unexamined life. When you live an unexamined life, it actually doesn't lead you great places, because those unexamined stories, well, they shape your decisions. They impact every relationship that you have. And because culture is shaped by the leader, it impacts every single person in your sphere of influence. Those stories are powerful, and your brain clings to them because they feel safe. I know stories for me are things like, I'm too much. You want it to be all about you. Those are stories that people have said or I have come up with. Yours might be, I'm not creative, or I'm not good at math, or I'm never going to measure up. I can't be like this person over here. Or why do I do that? It always happens this way. All of those stories, we tend to have negative stories, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. And when that happens, you are leading again from fear. Like we talked about in the last episode, I think that's episode 103, when we talked about the Enneagram. When we talked about that, it's got, your personality might have its hands on the steering wheel, and your stories might be influencing that too, and really just pushing the gas. And when you're doing that, you're leading out of fear instead of having joy as the center. So cognitive research, when we start digging into the brain science, I can nerd out on this all day long. In fact, the book has 350 citations in it. If you ever wondered if I were a nerd at heart, 100%, or as my friend Carrie says, hundo P. The cognitive science really shows that our brains are wired for story. This is how our brains work. We make narratives to make sense of the world, and you've been doing it since you were about 2.5, 3 years old. This is how we understand the world. We put it into the form of a story. And so leaders who can identify and reshape stories, these unhelpful stories that are old, and then you create new stories that are healthier. When you can do that, like I talked about that my client did, that I am a good leader, I am connected to people, and I'm learning to be better, that story starts to create healthier teams, but also teams that are more resilient. We talk a lot about resiliency. It's a big buzzword. This is how you start to do that. And there was a research study. These are technically called lay stories. Our brain makes up these stories, and brain scientists often call them lay stories, Lay, meaning like a lay person, not an expert. So we create these lay stories. And so they did an experiment with a group of college students who were historically underprivileged and didn't have as many resources. And so they had a lot of stories that they don't belong, I'm not good enough to be here, all of those kind of stories that we all have at times. Sometimes I like to call them imposter feelings, imposter stories, not a syndrome. But these lay stories come up. And so they used what they called lay story interventions to start changing those stories. And the results showed that the college students who had these lay story interventions, meaning they started to learn how to rewrite the stories. They learned how to do that. Not only did they become more resilient, they had more motivation and better problem solving skills, they also ended up with higher GPAs, higher levels of graduation rates, and higher placements later on. So learning how to reframe your stories is not a skill for the faint of heart that produces very little. It is incredibly effective. So if you are wanting that, you've got to learn how to rewrite these stories. So I'm going to pause for a second and talk about why that's important in the book. So my new book, Joyosity, How to Cultivate Intense Happiness in Work and Life, even if things are what they are, because you can't change what happens to you all the time. We don't have control over that. You do have control of the stories. And so even if things are what they are, you can start to change the stories. And in the book, it's filled with practical ways, not only just to identify the stories that are holding you back, talking about the Enneagram, but also how to rewrite them into stories that actually produce not only more effectiveness, but joy. How do you cultivate that even if things are what they are? This is a key part of the book. So if you want early access to some of the chapters that are coming soon, if you would like to join the Very Important Party, which is a group of people who are getting access and special behind the scenes, go to jennwhitmer.com/books. And you can pre-order the book there. You can join the VIP group and get all of that behind the scenes goodness before the book comes out in the fall. So in the book, there I have a whole chapter on stories and this whole idea that we're talking about. And we're not digging into all of that today. So what you can do today is a very quick idea of how do you rewrite this story. So when you start thinking about, okay, stories, what are you talking about? Is this in the back of my brain? I don't know. All of that can be really confusing. So we're just going to make it very, very simple. The first thing I want you to do is notice when you're telling yourself a story. That's really the only thing that I want to talk about today. Pay attention to the words that are on repeat in your brain. They might be your words. They might be words from your great Aunt Bethel, who said something to you one time at Thanksgiving. It might be that early boss who said you should stick to spreadsheets. It might be another leader who said something to you, or even a friend. What are the words that are on repeat for you? What are the words that are on repeat? I want you just to start identifying that. Because when you start, the only way you can start to change the story is to identify the story. In the book, I dig way more into how do you do this. But as you start to identify that, is this helpful for you? Is that a helpful story? Does it encourage you? Because I've definitely got some stories that are super encouraging. I can think about my great Aunt Frances. I loved Aunt Frances. She was an amazing woman at 4'9", little Sicilian that she was. And one of the things, the stories from her that play on repeat is she talks about showing up. Show up. You got to show up. And that has led me so well. So not every story you have is unhelpful, but you've got to identify the ones that are. Otherwise, it's going to control you. Again, we talked about it last week. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So once you start to identify and shift the stories, that ripple effect comes out into your leadership, your daily life, your feeling of joy, of how you stay in the joy ratio, that 35, 10, 55 that we talked about a couple episodes ago. It helps you stay in joy. It helps you understand what's toil. Understanding your stories helps you manage that messy middle, that 55% in the middle. And that starts to impact your team and you will see better results. So if you're thinking, you're like, I need more. I need more than just noticing it. Yes, I've got not only the Joyosity book, but there is an accompanying workbook called the Joyosity Works Playbook that gives you deeper frameworks to go further in this. And you can really root those old stories. You can find them and replace them with the new narratives that actually work for the way your life is right now. If you don't change your stories, if you don't own your story will own you. It's the one leading. And that inner narrative for you as the leader always becomes your team's outer experience. And I want you to be the leader of your life. And I want joy to be at the center of that. And learning how to rewrite these stories is how you do that. Next week, we're going to talk about values and why values matter. But you got to do some of this story work before you can dig into values. Just start to notice what's on repeat. Because when you start to learn how to change your story, then you learn how to change the real results of your life. And if I can be your coach for just a second, if you imagine my Ted Lasso gif of being your coach, take a breath and ask yourself, what's the story you've been telling yourself that might not be true anymore? If you aren't sure where to start, I just think about that and make sure that you go and pre-order Joyosity at jennwhitmer.com/books, because you can dig in much further and you'll get the frameworks on how to really change them in your everyday life. And if you know somebody else that you're like, oh my gosh, they constantly say this and it drives me crazy, I always want you to start with you. But sometimes, what you want to share it with a friend because you want the joy to spread. And I want that too. So make sure that you share this episode with somebody who has that soundtrack that isn't helping them anymore. And check the show notes for all the links. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm at Jenn_Whitmer. Just drop me an email, Jenn with 2 N's at jennwhitmer.com. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts about this, hear the stories, because when you name it, you can start to do something about it. Last week, I told you that self-awareness without self-disclosure is just self-centeredness. So tell me, if you're afraid to tell other people, you can tell me. I would love for you to share these episodes on your social or text them to friends, because this matters for you as a leader, for a movement to change culture and our communities. We've got to change the stories if we want to have joy in the center. I am so grateful for you being here. I know that your earballs have a lot coming at them. And I thank you for spending time with Joyosity Podcast. Rate and subscribe. It helps everybody join in our mission to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. I want to talk about values next week. I can't wait to show you how they actually work for you as a leader. But I always want you to remember that if you don't own your story is going to own you.